vast expanse of the galaxy where plasma cannons could vaporize starships and energy weapons could slice through reinforced battle armor like paper, humanity arrived at the Galactic Council carrying what appeared to be the most primitive weapon anyone had seen in 10,000 years. While other species showcased their molecular disruptors, gravity hammers, and quantum pulse rifles, the human representative simply placed a small metal tube on the demonstration table. The alien delegates burst into laughter. Some pointed with their multiple appendages, others clicked their mandibles in amusement. How could these newcomers possibly think that their ancient projectile weapon could compete with the advanced technology of civilized species? But laughter has a way of dying when the impossible becomes reality. And sometimes the most primitive tool in the right hands becomes the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy. What the aliens didn't understand was that humans had spent millennia perfecting something they had abandoned centuries ago, the art of precision, patience, and the deadly ballet of a single shot that could change the course of history. They were about to learn that evolution isn't always about moving forward. Sometimes it's about perfecting what already works. The massive crystalline halls of the Galactic Council station buzzed with excitement as representatives from across the galaxy gathered for the annual Weapons Demonstration Summit. Towering Vorthak warriors in their ceremonial armor stood beside graceful Etherian diplomats, their translucent skin shimmering with bioluminescent patterns. The air hummed with dozens of different languages, all filtered through universal translators that created a symphony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones. Commander Elena Vasquez walked through the crowd, her simple human military uniform drawing curious stares from beings that had never seen her species before. Earth had only been admitted to the Galactic Council 6 months ago, and this was humanity's first major interstellar gathering. Elena carried herself with quiet confidence, her weathered hands steady at her sides, dark eyes taking in everything with the careful observation of someone who had spent decades in hostile territory. The demonstration arena was a marvel of engineering, a transparent sphere large enough to house a small city, surrounded by quantum shields that could contain the most destructive weapons in known space. Elena watched as the first presenter, a Krulon weapons engineer with 6 arms and skin like polished bronze, activated his latest creation. The molecular disruptor cannon materialized from compressed matter, its sleek form pulsing with azure energy. "Behold," the Krulon announced through his translator, his voice carrying the pride of his species. "The MK7 molecular disruptor, capable of reducing any target to its component atoms from a distance of 50 kilometers. He gestured to a series of practice targets, thick slabs of reinforced metalloy that could withstand the impact of a small starship. The weapon charged with a sound like controlled lightning, and when it fired, the targets simply ceased to exist, not even leaving dust behind." The crowd erupted in appreciative sounds from dozens of species. Elena noted the way the other military representatives leaned forward, some already pulling out their communication devices to contact their home worlds about potential trade agreements. Next came a Zephyrian arms dealer, her serpentine form coiled around a platform that rose from the arena floor. Her weapon was beautiful in its complexity, a device that seemed to bend space around itself, reality warping in gentle spirals around its core. "The gravity hammer," she announced, her triple voices harmonizing through the translator. "It creates localized gravitational anomalies that can crush targets or launch them into neighboring star systems." The demonstration was spectacular. Asteroids brought in specially for the event were twisted into impossible shapes, compressed into diamonds, or flung away at velocities that would carry them to distant galaxies. The assembled crowd cheered again, and Elena noticed several military advisors frantically taking notes. For 3 hours, the demonstrations continued. Plasma rifles that could boil oceans, energy shields that could deflect supernova, quantum torpedoes that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Each weapon was more impressive than the last, showcasing technology that represented millions of years of combined advancement from species that had been exploring space since before Earth's continents had settled into their current positions. Finally, the announcer, a distinguished Altarian with crystalline features that reflected the arena's lights, called Elena's name. "We now welcome Commander Elena Vasquez, representing the newly admitted planet Earth and the human species." Elena walked into the arena, and the massive crowd fell silent. She carried with her a simple black case, not much larger than the briefcases that human businessmen once carried to work. No energy signatures emanated from it. No quantum fields distorted the space around it. It was just a case. She opened it carefully, revealing what appeared to be an antique. The rifle was long and elegant in its simplicity, crafted from wood and steel with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of individual craftsmanship rather than mass production. The metal had been blued to a deep, dark finish,
and the wooden stock showed the subtle grain patterns that only came from natural materials. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd.
Then someone laughed. It might have been a Krulon, with their distinctive barking sound, or perhaps one of the gas giant dwellers, with their musical chortling. Within moments, the laughter spread through the arena like wildfire. Beings pointed with various appendages, their universal translators converting amusement into dozens of different expressions of mirth. "Is this some kind of joke?" called out General Thrak, a massive Vorthak whose species had been conquering star systems when humans were still discovering fire. His translator rendered his question in a tone of barely controlled disdain. "We came here to see advanced weapons, not museum pieces." Elena waited for the laughter to die down, her expression never changing. When the arena finally quieted, she spoke in a clear, steady voice. "This is a 1903 Springfield rifle, modified with modern human precision engineering. It fires a single projectile using controlled chemical expansion." The laughter started again, louder this time. Ambassador Zethkar of the Etherian High Council, a being whose species had mastered energy manipulation on a galactic scale, rose from his seat. "Commander Vasquez, with all due respect to your young species, we appreciate the historical significance of your weapon. But this is a demonstration of current military capability. Perhaps you misunderstood the purpose of this gathering." Elena shouldered the rifle, her movements fluid and practiced. "I understand perfectly, Ambassador. This rifle represents current human military philosophy. We believe in precision over power, skill over technology. But surely you cannot expect such a primitive device to compete with modern weapons," protested Dr. Curtis Zelnoth, the Krulon engineer, who had demonstrated the molecular disruptor. "My cannon can destroy targets at 50 kilometers. Your projectile weapon cannot possibly match such range or destructive capability." Elena nodded respectfully. "You're right about the range, Doctor. This rifle is most effective at about 1 kilometer, and you're certainly correct about destructive capability. This weapon cannot destroy buildings or vaporize starships." "Then what possible military application could it have?" demanded General Thrak, his massive frame radiating impatience. "In modern warfare, we engage enemies across vast distances with weapons that can eliminate entire enemy formations." Elena's eyes found the general in the crowd, and for a moment something in her gaze made the massive warrior shift uncomfortably. "This weapon is designed for a very specific purpose, General. It eliminates individual targets with absolute precision." Commander Veltar of the Aquatic Coalition, a being whose homeworld had never known warfare due to their species' natural pacifism, leaned forward with scientific curiosity. "But Commander, even assuming perfect accuracy, how could a single projectile affect the outcome of a battle involving thousands of combatants and advanced technology?" Elena adjusted her stance slightly, the rifle moving with her as if it were an extension of her own body. "Sometimes, Commander, a battle isn't won by destroying everything in sight. Sometimes it's won by destroying the right thing at the right moment." The crowd grew restless. Several delegates began to murmur among themselves, and Elena could hear the universal translators converting their comments into a babble of criticism and confusion. Someone suggested that perhaps humanity wasn't ready for galactic citizenship if this was the extent of their military development. Another voice questioned whether Earth had any technology worth sharing with the broader galactic community. Elena waited for the crowd to settle before speaking again. "I'd like to propose a small test if the council will permit it." Ambassador Zethkar consulted with the other senior council members before nodding. "What kind of test, Commander?" "A practical demonstration. I understand that the arena's targeting systems can create moving targets with variable shields and countermeasures." "That's correct," confirmed the arena's technical administrator, a spider-like being whose species had designed most of the galaxy's advanced simulation technology. "We can create targets that mimic any known military technology, from personal armor to capital ship defensive systems." Elena nodded. "I'd like you to create a target that represents a critical system, something small, well-defended, and moving unpredictably. Something that the advanced weapons we've seen today would have difficulty hitting without causing massive collateral damage." The technical administrator's multiple eyes focused on various holographic displays that appeared around his workstation.
What kind of critical system?
Elena considered for a moment. "A command bridge viewport on a moving starship populated by friendly hostages who must not be harmed." A new wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Such a scenario was not uncommon in real warfare, where enemy commanders often surrounded themselves with prisoners or civilian shields. It was one of the most challenging military scenarios imaginable. requiring absolute precision to eliminate the target without harming innocents. The difficulty level would be extreme, warned the administrator.
The target would be approximately 2 meters by 1 meter, moving in 3 dimensions at combat speeds, protected by military-grade shields, and surrounded by areas that must not be damaged.
Perfect, Elena replied. The administrator looked to the council for confirmation, received their nods, and began configuring the test. The arena's hologram shifted and reformed, creating the bridge section of a generic starship. The vessel was in motion, banking and rolling as if taking evasive action during combat. Through the large viewport, the holographic figures of civilians could be clearly seen. The ship's shields flickered and pulsed with realistic energy patterns. The target area is marked in red, the administrator announced. It represents a critical command console that must be destroyed to disable the vessel. However, the area marked in blue contains civilians who must not be harmed. Any shot that damages the blue area will be considered a failure. Elena studied the target as it moved through its complex pattern. The red zone was small, perhaps the size of a dinner plate, and it was never stationary for more than a split second. The blue zones surrounding it were much larger, and even a slight miscalculation would result in civilian casualties. "This is impossible," declared Dr. Gilias. "Zelnov, my molecular disruptor, despite its precision, could not guarantee avoiding the civilian areas. The energy discharge alone would be lethal to anyone within 10 meters of the target." Other weapons engineers nodded in agreement.
The gravity hammer would affect everything within a 100-meter radius. The quantum torpedoes were designed for large-scale destruction.
Even the most precise energy weapons would produce secondary effects that would be fatal to nearby civilians. Elena raised the rifle to her shoulder and sighted down the barrel. The weapon had no visible targeting systems, no glowing displays or quantum processors, just metal sights that humans had been using for centuries, aligned by eye and adjusted by experience. The crowd fell silent, watching as Elena tracked the moving target.
Her breathing slowed and deepened, each exhale steady and controlled. The rifle moved in tiny increments, following the erratic motion of the simulated starship.
Minutes passed. The target continued its evasive pattern, and Elena continued to track it with mechanical patience. Some in the crowd began to fidget, unsure why she was taking so long to fire. Energy weapons could be discharged almost instantaneously. Even kinetic weapons could be fired rapidly with computer assistance. But Elena waited. Her finger rested gently on the trigger, applying no pressure, her stance rock solid despite the minutes of holding the weapon ready. She was waiting for something that only she could see. A moment in the target's pattern that would align with her understanding of ballistics, timing, and the three-dimensional mathematics of a shot that had to be perfect. The moment came. The rifle spoke with a sharp crack that seemed almost anticlimactic after the spectacular energy discharges of the previous demonstrations. A small puff of smoke drifted from the barrel, and for a heartbeat, nothing seemed to happen. Then the holographic command console exploded in a shower of sparks. The red target zone had been struck precisely in its center, the single projectile punching through the ship's shields and hull plating to destroy the critical systems. The blue zones remained untouched. The civilian figures continued their programmed activities, unharmed and unaware that death had passed within centimeters of them. The arena fell completely silent. Elena lowered the rifle and turned to face the crowd. "The target has been eliminated with 0 civilian casualties and no collateral damage to surrounding systems." The silence stretched on for several more seconds before Commander Veltar of the Aquatic Coalition spoke, his voice filled with wonder. "How did you calculate the trajectory through the moving shields? The quantum variance alone should have made precision impossible." Elena smiled for the first time since entering the arena. "I didn't calculate anything, Commander. I've been shooting rifles like this since I was 8 years old. At some point, it stops being mathematics and starts being instinct." General Thrax's massive form was still, his warrior's mind clearly wrestling with what he had just witnessed. But the preparation time was enormous. In a real combat situation, you would not have minutes to line up your shot. Elena's expression grew serious. "Oh, General, I've been lining up that shot since I walked into this arena. Every movement of the target, every variation in its pattern has been recorded and analyzed by 40 years of experience. When the moment came, I was ready." The questions came rapidly after that. How could humans develop such precision without computer assistance? What training methods could produce such skill? How many humans possessed similar abilities? Elena answered what she could, but she could see that the aliens were struggling with a concept that seemed impossible to their technology-dependent civilizations.
The idea that biological organisms could outperform quantum computers in specific applications challenged their understanding of advancement and progress. Finally, Ambassador Zefkar rose from his seat, his crystalline features reflecting the arena lights as he considered his words carefully.
Commander Vasquez, I believe I speak for the entire council when I say that your demonstration has been enlightening. However, I must ask the obvious question. What practical application does such a weapon have in large-scale military operations? Elena shouldered her rifle and closed the case. Mr.
Ambassador, the universe is full of problems that cannot be solved by vaporizing everything within 50 kilometers.
Sometimes you need to remove a single threat without harming anything else. Sometimes you need to strike a target that cannot be reached by conventional means. Sometimes you need to send a message that says, humanity is watching, and humanity does not miss. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled representatives of dozens of species and thousands of worlds. Today was a demonstration of human precision. But the real demonstration of human capability will come when you need something done that no one else can do. When the impossible shot is the only option. When the margin for error is zero. When the stakes are so high that failure means the death of millions. Elena turned and walked toward the arena exit, her footsteps echoing in the vast space.
When that day comes, she called over her shoulder, you'll remember the human with the tiny weapon. As she disappeared through the exit portal, the arena erupted in discussion. Delegates clustered together, their voices rising in animated conversation as they tried to process what they had witnessed.
Some dismissed it as an interesting but impractical display. Others began to consider the implications of precision that could not be matched by technology. But in the minds of the military professionals present, a new understanding began to take shape. They had spent centuries developing bigger, more powerful, more destructive weapons.
They had created devices that could tear apart the fabric of space itself, unleash forces that could sterilize entire planets, command energies that dwarfed the output of stars. And today a human with an antique had shown them something they had forgotten was possible. Perfect precision, absolute control, and the kind of surgical capability that their advanced weapons could not match.
In the depths of space on ships and stations and worlds across the galaxy, military analysts would spend the coming weeks trying to understand what they had seen. They would run simulations, conduct tests, and develop new strategies based on the possibility that sometimes the most advanced weapon in the galaxy was the one, guided by skill instead of science.
But Elena Vasquez was already gone, returning to her ship and her crew, carrying with her the knowledge that humanity had just announced itself to the galaxy in a way that no one would forget. The laughter had died, replaced by something far more valuable: respect, caution, and the beginning of reputation that would serve humanity well in the challenges that lay ahead. 3 months after the weapons demonstration, Elena Vasquez found herself aboard the GSV Harmony's Edge, a massive diplomatic vessel carrying representatives from 12 different species to the Outer Rim territories. The ship was a marvel of cooperative engineering, its sections designed to accommodate the wildly different environmental needs of its passengers. Elena's quarters were in the human-compatible zone, a relatively small area that maintained Earth's normal atmosphere and gravity. She was cleaning her rifle when the emergency alarm began to sound. The weapon lay disassembled on her bunk, each component carefully maintained according to the routines that had been drilled into her during decades of military service. The stock had been hand-carved from Terran oak, its wood grain following patterns that provided both strength and beauty. The barrel had been precision-machined to tolerances that most alien species would consider impossible without quantum-level manufacturing. Every screw, spring, and pin had been crafted with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of human obsession with perfection. The alarm continued its urgent wailing as Elena rapidly reassembled the rifle. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, each motion automatic after years of repetition. The weapon came together in under 30 seconds, and she was already reaching for ammunition when her communicator activated. "All passengers report to emergency stations immediately," came the voice of Captain Morden, the ship's Altarian commander. "We have encountered a hostile situation and require immediate compliance with emergency protocols." Elena secured her rifle and made her way to the human delegation's emergency station, a reinforced compartment near the ship's core where they could survive even if the outer hull was breached. Ambassador Chen, the senior human diplomat aboard, was already there along with the rest of the human contingent. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a xenobiology specialist, Lieutenant Commander James Park, Elena's military aide, and Professor David Okafor, an expert in galactic law. "What's the situation?" Elena asked as she checked her equipment. Ambassador Chen, a distinguished woman in her 60s, whose silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun, consulted her tablet.
Pirates, apparently. A group calling themselves the Blood Star Consortium has surrounded us with 6 armed vessels.
Captain Mordoon is trying to negotiate, but initial reports suggest they're demanding the surrender of several high-value passengers. Elena frowned.
Which passengers? The Krulon defense minister, the Etherian trade representative, and Chen paused, checking her tablet again. And you specifically. Elena felt her blood cool.
Pirates typically wanted ransom payments or valuable cargo, not specific individuals. Any idea why they want me? Lieutenant Commander Park, a younger man with the alert posture of someone who had seen combat, pulled up a tactical display on his own device.
Could be related to the weapons demonstration, ma'am. Your performance there generated a lot of attention. Maybe someone wants to test human capabilities under pressure. Doctor. Mitchell, a woman in her 40s whose expertise in alien psychology had made her invaluable to the diplomatic mission, looked up from her own analysis. Or they want to make a statement. Capturing the human representative who embarrassed the galactic military establishment would certainly send a message. The ship shuddered slightly, and Elena recognized the feeling of weapons fire impacting the shields. She had felt it too many times during humanity's brief but violent conflicts with space pirates in their own solar system. How many pirates are we dealing with? Elena asked. Park consulted his tactical data. 6 ships, total crew estimated at around 300. Mix of different species, but primarily Korthek and Rogue Vorthek. Heavy weapons, military-grade shields, and enough firepower to reduce this ship to debris if they decide negotiations have failed.
Elena considered their options. The GSV Harmony's Edge was a diplomatic vessel, armed only with defensive systems and a small security contingent.
Against 6 pirate ships, their chances in a straight fight were essentially 0. What's Captain Morden's plan? She asked.
Ambassador Chen's expression was grim. Surrender the demanded passengers and hope the pirates honor their word to release the ship afterward. Elena shook her head.
That's not happening. Pirates don't honor agreements. And even if they did, handing over passengers sets a precedent that makes every diplomatic mission a target. Another impact shook the ship, stronger this time. Elena could hear the subtle change in the engine harmonics that meant the captain was maneuvering, probably trying to keep the pirates from achieving an optimal firing position. Elena's communicator chirped, and Captain Mordoon's voice filled the small compartment. Commander Vasquez, please report to the bridge immediately. The pirate leader wishes to speak with you directly. Elena exchanged glances with Ambassador Chen, who nodded reluctantly. Go, but be careful. These pirates have obviously planned this operation specifically around your presence. The bridge of the GSV Harmony's Edge was a circular chamber designed to accommodate the different sensory needs of various species. Etherian crew members worked at stations that interfaced with their bioelectric abilities, while Krulon engineers monitored systems through haptic feedback arrays that suited their 6-armed physiology. Captain Mordoon stood at the central command station, his crystalline features reflecting the light from multiple displays. Commander, the captain said as Elena arrived, the pirate leader insists on speaking with you directly. I must advise you that their demands are quite specific. Elena nodded and stepped into position before the main communication array. The display activated, showing the bridge of what appeared to be a modified Korthek battlecruiser. The figure that appeared on screen was immediately recognizable as a Vorthak, but one who had clearly fallen far from his species' warrior traditions. Where most Vorthak wore ceremonial armor that honored their ancestors, this one was covered in crude modifications and pirate regalia. The famous human sharpshooter, the pirate leader said, his voice carrying the distinctive growling undertone of his species. I am War Chief Graktar, and you will surrender yourself to my ships immediately. Elena kept her expression neutral. I'm afraid I can't do that, War Chief. Perhaps we can discuss alternative arrangements. Graktar's laugh was a harsh barking sound. There are no alternatives, human. Your demonstration at the council station was seen by many as an insult to properly evolved species. Some of us have decided to provide a corrective lesson. Elena felt a chill of understanding. This wasn't random piracy. This was a deliberate attempt to humiliate humanity and prove that their precision weapons were useless in real combat situations. What exactly do you have in mind, War Chief? She asked. Graktar leaned forward, his scarred face filling the display. A simple test. You and your primitive weapon against my champions in single combat. If you win, we release your ship. If you lose, he smiled, showing teeth that had been filed to points. Your species learns that ancient weapons have no place in the modern galaxy. Captain Morden stepped forward. This is completely unacceptable. I will not allow a passenger to be subjected to such barbarism. Graktar's attention shifted to the captain, and his expression darkened.
Captain, you will allow whatever I decide to allow.
My ships have enough firepower to turn your vessel into expanding plasma. The only reason you are still alive is because I choose to offer this alternative. Elena raised her hand slightly, indicating that the captain should let her handle the situation. What are the terms of this combat, War Chief? Simple. You board my flagship with your weapon. My champions will be armed with modern military equipment.
The combat takes place in my ship's cargo bay, which provides adequate space in multiple levels for maneuvering. Last combatant standing wins.
Elena considered the proposal. It was obviously a trap, designed to prove that human precision weapons were useless against opponents equipped with energy shields and advanced armor.
But it was also an opportunity, and Elena had learned long ago that opportunities were often disguised as problems. "How many champions?" she asked.
Kraktar's smile widened. 3.
All experienced warriors, all properly equipped? Surely that should be adequate to test your human precision against real military capability.
Elena nodded slowly.
I accept your terms, War Chief.
But I have one condition. Kraktar's expression shifted to suspicion.
What condition?
The combat is observed by neutral parties. I want representatives from both ships present as witnesses. No interference from either side, but full documentation of the proceedings. Kraktar considered this, his scarred features showing his internal debate. Finally he nodded. Acceptable. But know this, my champions have killed dozens of opponents in similar contests. Your weapon demonstration was impressive against a stationary target, but real combat is very different.
Elena smiled for the first time since the conversation began. War Chief, you're absolutely right.
Real combat is very different from target practice. I'm looking forward to showing you exactly how different. The communication link closed, and Captain Morden immediately turned to Elena with obvious concern.
Commander, this is clearly a trap. These pirates have no intention of honoring any agreement.
Elena nodded. You're probably right, Captain. But they've made a critical error in their planning.
What error?
Elena's expression hardened as she considered the tactical situation. They've assumed that my rifle is only effective against stationary targets. They've planned this entire scenario around the idea that moving, armored opponents will render my weapon useless. Captain Morden's crystalline features shifted, and what Elena had learned was the Altarian equivalent of confusion. Are they wrong? Elena checked her rifle, ensuring that every component was properly seated and functional. Captain, I've been hunting moving targets my entire career. Pirates, enemy soldiers, hostile aliens in environments where energy weapons would be useless due to atmospheric conditions or electromagnetic interference. The galaxy is full of situations where precision kinetic weapons are not only useful, they're the only option that works.
Dr. Belmoff, the ship's Krulon chief medical officer, approached the group. Her 6 arms moved independently as she consulted multiple medical scanners.
Commander Vasquez, I must protest this plan on medical grounds. The human physiology is not designed for combat against armored opponents equipped with energy weapons.
Elena smiled at the doctor's concern. Dr. Velnoth, human physiology has been killing armored opponents for thousands of years.
We've just gotten better at it with practice. Lieutenant Commander Park arrived on the bridge, carrying Elena's equipment case and looking distinctly unhappy. Ma'am, I must officially recommend against this course of action. The tactical situation is completely unfavorable and the enemy has every advantage. Elena took the case and opened it, revealing not just her rifle but additional equipment that hadn't been visible during the weapons demonstration. Special ammunition, night vision equipment, and other gear that spoke of serious military preparation. Lieutenant, what's the first rule of asymmetric warfare? Park straightened. Never fight the enemy's fight, ma'am. Force them to adapt to your capabilities rather than adapting to theirs. Elena nodded approvingly. Exactly. These pirates have prepared for a conventional fight between advanced weapon systems. They've assumed that human precision weapons operate under the same limitations as their own technology. Captain Morden watched Elena's preparations with growing concern. What limitations would those be, Commander? Elena loaded a special cartridge into her rifle, checking the action with practiced movements. Captain, when most species developed energy weapons, they gained power and range but lost something crucial: the ability to operate effectively in unpredictable environments. Energy weapons require clear sightlines, predictable atmospheric conditions, and relatively static targeting solutions.
She paused, her expression growing distant as she considered the tactical possibilities. Kinetic weapons like this rifle operate under completely different principles. They're effective in smoke, underwater, in vacuum, through electromagnetic interference, around corners with ricochet shots, and in dozens of other situations where energy weapons fail.
Ambassador Chen, who had arrived during the discussion, stepped forward. Elena, I understand the tactical advantages, but you'll be outnumbered 3-1 against opponents who presumably have superior armor and weaponry. Elena's smile was cold and professional.
Ambassador, I've never been in a fair fight in my entire career. Fair fights are for sports competitions and training exercises.
In real combat, you stack every advantage you can get and then you win. She turned to Captain Morden. Captain, prepare to transport me to the pirate flagship.
And make sure your sensors are recording everything. If this goes badly, I want there to be a record of exactly what happened.
Captain Morden's crystalline features reflected his concern, but he nodded. Commander, for what it's worth, your species has already proven more capable than most of us initially believed.
Perhaps that will be enough. Elena shouldered her rifle and walked toward the transport bay.
Captain, we're about to find out exactly how capable humans can be when everything is on the line. As the transport systems powered up, Elena considered the tactical situation one more time. 3 opponents, presumably well-armed and experienced.
An unfamiliar environment designed to give them every advantage. And the knowledge that if she failed, it wouldn't just be her own life at stake, but the lives of everyone aboard the diplomatic vessel.
But Elena had faced worse odds before.
She had learned her trade in conflicts where human survival depended on individuals who could make impossible shots under impossible conditions. She had trained with weapons that required absolute precision because there was no room for error, no second chances, no margin for failure.
The pirates had made their challenge based on their understanding of conventional warfare and advanced technology. They were about to discover that humans had spent millennia perfecting a very different approach to combat, one that relied on skill, precision, and the kind of deadliness that came from never having the luxury of overwhelming firepower.
Elena stepped onto the transport platform, her rifle ready and her mind already calculating angles, distances, and the dozens of variables that would determine whether she lived or died in the next hour. The molecular transporters engaged, and she felt the familiar sensation of her atoms being disassembled and transmitted across space.
In moments she would be aboard an enemy ship, surrounded by hostile aliens who believed that human precision was no match for galactic military technology. They had planned this confrontation to prove that humanity's ancient weapons were useless in modern warfare.
Elena intended to teach them that sometimes the oldest lessons are the most deadly. Elena materialized aboard the pirate flagship in a chamber that reeked of unwashed bodies and recycled air.
The transport bay was dimly lit, its walls scarred with blast marks from previous conflicts. 3 Corvette guards surrounded her immediately, their weapons trained on her position while their multiple eyes studied her with predatory interest.
"Move," growled the nearest guard, gesturing with a weapon that looked like it could punch holes through starship armor. Elena complied, noting the layout of the ship as they escorted her through corridors that had been modified extensively from their original military specifications. The cargo bay that would serve as their arena was massive, clearly designed to hold stolen goods from multiple raids. But the pirates had prepared it specifically for this confrontation. Multiple levels of catwalks and platforms had been installed, creating a 3-dimensional battlefield with numerous hiding spots and ambush positions. Portable lighting rigs cast harsh shadows throughout the space, creating a maze of visibility and concealment. War Chief Graktar waited in the center of the bay, surrounded by dozens of pirates from various species. They had turned the combat into entertainment, with betting pools and spectator areas set up around the perimeter. Elena noticed recording devices positioned to capture every angle of the fight, confirming her suspicion that this was as much about propaganda as personal combat. "The human arrives," Graktar announced, his voice echoing through the bay. "Behold the representative of a species that thinks ancient weapons can compete with modern military technology." Elena ignored the jeering crowd and focused on her opponents. 3 figures stood on different levels of the arena, each one equipped with state-of-the-art military gear. The first was another Vorthak, massively built even by the standards of his warrior species. Wearing powered armor that hummed with energy fields, his weapon appeared to be a plasma rifle with targeting assistance. The second was a Korthek female, her 4 arms allowing her to carry multiple weapons simultaneously. Energy shields flickered around her position, and Elena could see the telltale glow of personal cloaking technology built into her armor. She would be fast, well-defended, and capable of attacking from multiple angles simultaneously. The third opponent was the most concerning, a hybrid being that appeared to combine cybernetic enhancements with natural Zephyrian flexibility. Its serpentine lower body allowed for rapid 3-dimensional movement, while cybernetic arms provided steady weapon platforms. The energy signature around its position suggested some kind of area denial system, possibly gravitational manipulation.
Elena studied the terrain, noting sightlines, cover positions, and the complex interplay of shadows and light that would affect visibility. The arena had been designed to favor mobile opponents with energy weapons, providing multiple firing positions while limiting clear sightlines for precision shooting. Your champions are impressive, War Chief, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the bay.
I assume they're experienced in this kind of combat. Graktar's laugh echoed through the space. Each has killed dozens of opponents in similar contests. They represent the finest warriors that modern military technology can produce. Elena nodded respectfully. And the rules? Simple.
Last combatant standing wins. No outside interference, no time limits. Combat ends when only one fighter remains active. Elena checked her rifle one final time, her movements careful and deliberate. She had loaded specialized ammunition for this engagement, rounds designed for penetrating energy shields and armor plating. Each cartridge represented centuries of human ballistic research, refined through countless conflicts where precision was literally a matter of life and death.
I'm ready, she announced. Graktar raised his hand, and the noise in the cargo bay died to whispers.
Let the combat begin. Elena immediately moved, not toward cover but directly into the center of the arena. This seemed to surprise her opponents, who had clearly expected her to seek concealment and attempt to snipe from hidden positions.
Instead, she walked calmly toward the middle of the space, her rifle held ready but not aimed at any specific target. The Vorthak champion fired first, his plasma bolt scorching the air where Elena had been standing.
But she was no longer there, having dropped into a combat role that brought her to a new position while maintaining her weapon's ready status. The hybrid fired next, its gravitational weapon warping space around Elena's position, but she had already anticipated the attack and moved clear. The Korthek activated her cloaking system and vanished, becoming a barely visible distortion in the air. But Elena's head turned immediately to track her movement, and she fired a single shot that sparked against the alien's energy shields.
The round didn't penetrate, but the impact was enough to overload the cloaking system and reveal the Korthek's position. Impossible, muttered someone in the watching crowd. How did she track through military-grade stealth technology? Elena continued moving, her patterns seeming random but actually following a careful plan that took her through positions that broke up her opponent's sight lines and prevented them from coordinating their attacks. She fired twice more, both shots striking shields or armor but not achieving penetration. The three champions began to coordinate, communicating through their combat systems to establish overlapping fields of fire. This was exactly what Elena had expected. Modern warriors trained to use their technological advantages to systematically eliminate threats through superior firepower and coordination.
But Elena had learned her trade in environments where such coordination was impossible.
She had fought in asteroid fields where communication was blocked, on worlds where electromagnetic storms rendered advanced targeting useless, and in situations where the only advantage was individual skill and the intimate knowledge of her weapons' capabilities. The Vorthak moved to a higher platform, seeking to establish dominance through superior position. The hybrid slithered around the arena's perimeter, using its gravitational manipulation to create obstacles and barriers. The Korthek activated her personal teleportation system, appearing and disappearing at random intervals to prevent Elena from establishing a clear shot. For several minutes, the battle continued, with Elena seeming to be at a severe disadvantage. Her opponent's energy weapons could fire rapidly and repeatedly, while her rifle required manual operation between shots. Their armor and shields provided protection against her attacks, while she relied only on movement and concealment for defense. The watching pirates began to cheer, convinced that the outcome was inevitable. Elena's shots, while accurate, seemed to be having little effect against her opponent's advanced defensive systems. But Elena was not trying to win the fight yet. She was learning. Each shot she fired was a test, revealing information about her opponent's defensive capabilities, reaction times, and tactical preferences. The Vorthak favored high ground and direct confrontation. The Korthek relied on mobility and surprise attacks. The hybrid used its environmental manipulation to control the battlefield and force opponents into disadvantageous positions. More importantly, Elena was observing the subtle details that her opponent's technology couldn't compensate for. The slight delay in the Vorthak's targeting system as it adjusted for elevation changes. The electromagnetic signature that preceded the Korthek's teleportation, visible to human eyes but apparently not detected by the alien's sensors. The gravitational distortions that the hybrid created, which followed predictable patterns based on its cybernetic limitations. Elena fired again, this time aiming not at an opponent but at a specific point on the arena's superstructure. The bullet ricocheted at a calculated angle, striking a power coupling that controlled one section of the lighting grid. Shadows shifted throughout the bay, creating new patterns of concealment.
"What is she doing?" demanded one of the watching pirates.
She's wasting ammunition on random targets. But Elena wasn't being random. She fired 3 more shots in rapid succession, each one striking different parts of the arena's infrastructure.
Lighting arrays failed, creating pools of darkness. Support struts rang with the impact of bullets that seemed to miss their intended targets.
Environmental controls sparked and died, changing the air circulation patterns in subtle ways. The 3 champions began to realize that Elena wasn't fighting them directly. She was fighting their technology. The hybrid tried to create a gravitational barrier, but its targeting system was confused by the changing electromagnetic environment.
The Korthek attempted to teleport, but her emergence point was predicted, and Elena was waiting with a shot that finally penetrated her weakened shields. The impact didn't kill the alien, but it sent her sprawling with significant damage to her armor systems.
The Vorthak roared in frustration and charged Elena's position, his plasma rifle firing continuously. But Elena had disappeared into the shadows she had created, and his targeting systems couldn't acquire a lock in the shifting light patterns.
Elena's voice echoed from the darkness, impossible to locate precisely.
The problem with advanced technology is that it makes you dependent on systems you don't fully understand. She fired from concealment, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating her position before she moved again. The bullet struck the Vorthak's armor and actually penetrated this time, the round having been specially designed to exploit the specific frequency patterns of Vorthak defensive systems.
The alien warrior staggered but didn't fall. His armor's self-repair systems engaged, sealing the breach and maintaining most of his protection. But Elena's shot had been precisely placed, damaging a key power coupling that reduced his energy shield effectiveness by 30%. "Your weapons are impressive," Elena called from a new position, her voice seeming to come from multiple directions as echoes bounced through the modified arena.
But they all operate on predictable principles: energy signatures, targeting algorithms, defensive protocols. Everything can be analyzed, understood, and defeated. The hybrid lashed out with its gravitational manipulation, trying to collapse Elena's hiding spots.
But she had anticipated this and was already moving, using the alien's own environmental changes to mask her approach. She fired again, the bullet following a complex ballistic path that took it around the hybrid's gravitational field to strike its cybernetic targeting system. The alien's movement became erratic as its enhanced coordination system struggled with damaged sensors. Elena emerged from cover long enough to fire twice more, each shot precisely targeted at specific components of the hybrid's technological enhancement. Korthek had recovered from her earlier wound and attempted another teleportation attack, appearing directly behind Elena's last known position. But Elena wasn't there. The caps assisted the sensual sanguine of some reason. She had read the electromagnetic patterns correctly and was waiting when the alien materialized, her rifle already aimed at the exact emergence point. The shot took the Korthek's center mass, penetrating her weakened shields and dropping her to the arena floor. She wasn't dead, but her armor systems were critically damaged and she was no longer capable of effective combat. 2 opponents down, 1 remaining. The Vorthak warrior had regrouped on a high platform, his massive form silhouetted against the arena's remaining lights. His plasma rifle charged with an ominous whine as he prepared for a final assault. "Impressive, human," he called down to Elena. "But my armor can withstand your primitive projectiles indefinitely. Eventually you will run out of ammunition." Elena stepped into a pool of light, making herself visible for the first time in several minutes. "You're right about ammunition. I only brought 20 rounds for this fight." The Vorthak's targeting system locked onto her position. "And how many have you fired?" Elena smiled. 19. The Vorthak's confusion lasted only a split second, but it was long enough. Elena's final shot wasn't aimed at him at all. It struck a structural support that she had weakened with her earlier shots, causing a section of the upper platform to collapse. The Vorthak, suddenly deprived of stable footing, plummeted toward the arena floor. His armor's anti-grav systems engaged, slowing his fall, but Elena was already moving to intercept his landing point. As the massive warrior touched down, she was waiting with her rifle reversed, the steel buttstock swinging in a precise arc that struck the damaged power coupling she had targeted earlier. The impact overloaded the alien's energy systems, causing a cascade failure that shut down his armor's primary functions. The Vorthak found himself suddenly vulnerable, his enhanced strength reduced to merely impressive rather than superhuman. Elena stepped back and shouldered her empty rifle. "The fight is over, champion. Yield and you keep your life." The Vorthak warrior looked around the arena, taking in the damaged infrastructure, his fallen comrades, and the human who had systematically dismantled 3 of the galaxy's finest warriors.
using nothing but an ancient projectile weapon and tactical knowledge that predated spaceflight.
He dropped his plasma rifle and raised his hands in surrender. Even the pirates who had been cheering for Elena's defeat seemed stunned by what they had witnessed. This hadn't been a conventional fight between advanced weapon systems. It had been a masterclass in asymmetric warfare, tactical analysis, and the kind of precision that turned any environment into a weapon. War Chief Graktar's scarred face showed his struggle to process what had happened. His champions hadn't been defeated by superior firepower or advanced technology. They had been systematically outfought by an opponent who understood their capabilities better than they did. Elena walked to the center of the arena, her empty rifle held loosely at her side. War Chief, your champions fought bravely and with honor. But they fought a technological battle against an enemy who understands that technology has limitations. Graktar's voice was barely above a whisper.
How?
Elena gestured to the damaged arena around them. Every advanced system has weaknesses. Power requirements, targeting limitations, predictable behavioral patterns. Your champions were trained to use their technology effectively, but they weren't trained to fight without it. She paused, her gaze taking in the watching crowd of pirates. Humans learned long ago that the most important weapon isn't the device in your hands.
It's the knowledge in your head and the will to use it effectively. Graktar stared at the three defeated champions, his warrior's mind clearly struggling with the implications of what he had seen.
But your weapon, it's so primitive, so limited. Elena's smile was cold and professional.
War Chief, primitive doesn't mean ineffective.
Sometimes the oldest solutions are the best solutions because they've been tested by time and proven in countless conflicts. She turned to address the entire assembly, her voice carrying clearly through the cargo bay. Your champions were defeated because they relied on technology to do their thinking for them. They forgot that warfare is ultimately about intelligence, adaptability, and the willingness to use any advantage available. Elena shouldered her rifle and walked toward the arena exit. I believe our agreement was that if I won, you would release the diplomatic vessel. Graktar nodded slowly, his scarred features showing reluctant respect.
The agreement will be honored, human. Your ship is free to continue its mission.
Elena paused at the arena exit and turned back one final time. War Chief, I want you to understand something important. Today's demonstration wasn't about human superiority. It was about the danger of underestimating any opponent based on their technology level. She gestured to the modified arena with its damaged systems and fallen champions.
There are species in this galaxy who have capabilities that your scanners can't detect, weapons that your shields can't stop, and knowledge that your computers can't process. The universe is full of surprises, and the most dangerous enemies are often the ones who don't fight the way you expect.
Elena disappeared through the exit portal, leaving behind an arena full of pirates who were beginning to understand that their assumptions about primitive species and ancient weapons might need some serious reconsideration. In the depths of the pirate flagship, emergency meetings were already beginning as the crew tried to process the tactical implications of what they had witnessed.
Word of the humans' victory would spread through the criminal networks, carrying with it a new understanding of what humanity might be capable of when pressed. But Elena was already gone, transported back to the diplomatic vessel that would carry her to her next assignment. The rifle was cleaned, maintained, and secured, ready for whatever challenges the galaxy might present. The demonstration was over, but the lesson was just beginning to spread through the star systems where criminals and warriors gathered to share stories of impossible victories and defeats that changed the way they thought about warfare itself. 6 months after the pirate encounter, news of Elena Vasquez and her primitive weapon had spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire through a dried forest. The story grew with each telling, becoming legend among military circles and criminal organizations alike. Some versions claimed she had defeated an entire pirate fleet single-handedly. Others insisted that human rifles could penetrate any known armor or shield system. A few even suggested that Earth was secretly preparing an invasion force equipped with these mysterious kinetic weapons. Elena found herself in the position of being simultaneously the most sought-after military consultant in the galaxy and its most misunderstood warrior.
Requests for training programs came from dozens of species, while intelligence agencies across the known worlds frantically tried to understand the true extent of human military capability. She was reviewing training proposals in her quarters aboard the GSB Diplomatic Excellence when the emergency alert came through. This time, it wasn't pirates or criminals. It was something far worse. The communication came directly from Galactic Council High Command, bypassing normal diplomatic channels and arriving with the highest possible priority classification.
Elena read the brief message twice before its full implications sank in. The Devourers had returned. Elena had heard whispers of the Devourers during her time at council stations and diplomatic gatherings. They were a nomadic species that appeared every few centuries, consuming entire star systems before disappearing back into the void between galaxies. Most spacefaring civilizations had encountered them at least once, and those encounters typically ended with the complete destruction of everything in their path. The Devourers were different from typical galactic threats. They weren't interested in conquest or resources in any conventional sense. They consumed entire planets, converting matter and energy into more of their kind before moving on to the next system. No one knew where they originated, how they reproduced, or why they followed the migration patterns they did. What made them truly terrifying was their approach to warfare. Devourer ships were living entities capable of adapting to any weapon used against them. Energy weapons became useless after a few shots as the creatures developed immunity. Kinetic weapons were absorbed and converted into biological mass. Even quantum weapons had limited effectiveness as the Devourers seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. The emergency message was brief and desperate. The Devourer scout force had been detected at the edge of the Kepler sector, moving toward inhabited systems. Traditional defenses had already proven useless. The Council was assembling an emergency response fleet, but their projections showed less than a 15% chance of success using conventional military tactics. They wanted Elena. Elena finished reading the message and immediately contacted Captain Moradin. The Altarian's crystalline features reflected his concern as he materialized on her personal communication display.
Commander, I assume you've received the emergency briefing from Council High Command? Elena nodded. How long before we reach the Kepler sector? At maximum speed, 18 hours. But, Commander, I must express my concern about this assignment. The Devourers are unlike any enemy you've previously encountered. They don't operate according to conventional military principles. Elena was already reaching for her equipment case. Captain, in my experience, the enemies that don't follow conventional principles are exactly the ones where unconventional solutions work best. The journey to the Kepler sector gave Elena time to study everything the Council had on Devourer physiology and tactical behavior. The files were extensive but frustrating, filled with reports of battles that started promisingly but ended in complete disaster as the alien entities adapted to whatever weapons were used against them.
The Devourers appeared to be silicon-based life forms that had evolved in the void between galaxies, feeding on stellar radiation and cosmic energy. Their ships were actually massive organisms, kilometers in length, with the ability to reconfigure their structure in real time to counter specific threats. They reproduced by converting consumed matter into new individuals, meaning that every planet they devoured made them stronger. Most concerning was their apparent intelligence. Devourers weren't mindless predators, but seemed to possess a collective consciousness that learned from every encounter.
Weapons that worked once never worked twice, and tactics that proved effective were quickly countered in subsequent engagements. Elena studied battle reports from the last major Devourer incursion 3 centuries earlier.
The Altarian defense fleet had initially achieved success with quantum disruptors, destroying several smaller Devourer entities. But within hours, the remaining creatures had adapted, their biology shifting to neutralize quantum weapons entirely. The Krulon had tried molecular dissolution technology with similar results, temporary success followed by complete immunity. By the time the GSV diplomatic excellence reached the Kepler sector, Elena had a basic understanding of the challenge she faced. Her rifle would be effective exactly once. After that, the Devourers would adapt to kinetic weapons, and her advantage would disappear. The Council fleet was already assembled in defensive positions around Kepler Prime, the sector's primary inhabited world. Elena counted 47 major warships representing 8 different species, along with countless support vessels and orbital defense platforms. It was the largest military force she had ever seen assembled for a single battle. Admiral Fexnara of the Etherian Navy commanded the fleet from her flagship, a massive vessel that seemed to be constructed from crystallized light. Her tactical briefing was concise and thoroughly depressing. The Devourer scout force consists of 3 entities, each approximately 5 kilometers in length. Our advanced scouts report that they're already adapting to our sensor sweeps, making detailed tactical analysis difficult. Elena studied the tactical displays showing the approaching threat.
The Devourers were unlike any ships she had ever seen, appearing more like massive sea creatures swimming through space than conventional vessels.
Their surfaces rippled and shifted constantly, and she could see weapon ports opening and closing in patterns that suggested organic growth rather than engineering. What's their estimated time of arrival? Elena asked.
Admiral Fexanara's bioluminescent patterns flickered with stress. 4 hours until they reach weapons range.
Commander Vasquez, I must be frank with you. Our tactical analysis suggests that conventional defense is impossible. These entities have proven immune to every weapon system we've developed.
Elena nodded, still studying the enemy formations.
Admiral, what's the Council's primary objective? Destroy the Devourers or protect the civilian population?
Ideally both, but if forced to choose, civilian protection takes priority.
We have evacuation ships standing by, but the Devourers move faster than our transport vessels. Elena considered the tactical situation.
3 massive entities against 47 warships, with the added complication that any successful weapon would only work once before the Devourers adapted to it. It was exactly the kind of impossible scenario where conventional military thinking broke down.
Admiral, I need detailed sensor data on the Devourers' adaptive capabilities, specifically how quickly they can modify their biology in response to new threats. Admiral Thexnara consulted with her tactical staff before responding. Previous encounters suggest adaptation times of 15 to 30 minutes for simple modifications, up to several hours for complex changes. However, once adapted, the immunity appears to be permanent and transferable to other Devourer entities. Elena felt a cold smile touch her lips. Admiral, I think I understand the problem. Everyone who's fought the Devourers has approached them as if they were ships or military technology. But they're not ships. They're animals. The Admiral's bioluminescent patterns shifted to confusion. I'm not certain I understand the distinction, Commander. Elena turned to address the assembled fleet commanders whose images filled the flagship's main display. The Devourers adapt to threats exactly the way any evolved creature would. They learn to recognize dangerous weapons and develop countermeasures. But like any biological system, their adaptation has limitations. She paused, her mind racing through the tactical possibilities. They can become immune to specific weapon types, but they can't become immune to being hunted. Admiral Thexanara's confusion deepened. Commander, could you clarify your tactical proposal? Elena's smile widened as the plan crystallized in her mind. Admiral, the Devourers have adapted to resist every advanced weapon in the galactic arsenal, but they've never encountered a weapon system designed specifically to hunt adaptive prey. She gestured to the tactical display showing the approaching entities. Human hunters have been dealing with adaptive prey for millions of years. Animals that learn to avoid traps, predators that change their behavior based on hunting pressure, creatures that develop immunity to specific toxins or threats. Elena turned to face the assembled commanders directly. The solution isn't to find a weapon they can't adapt to. The solution is to hunt them the way humans have always hunted adaptive prey, by understanding their behavior patterns and exploiting the limitations of their adaptation process. General Korthak of the Vorthak Defense Corps, his massive frame filling his portion of the display, leaned forward with interest. Explain this hunting strategy, human. Elena called up a new tactical display showing the Devourers' approach pattern. Look at their formation. They're maintaining distance from each other, probably to prevent a single weapon from affecting multiple entities. But that separation also means they can't share adaptive information in real time. She highlighted specific aspects of their movement. They're also approaching predictably, following the most direct route to their target. They're behaving like apex predators who have never been successfully hunted. Commander Veltar of the Aquatic Coalition, his scientific mind clearly engaged, asked, "What are you proposing, Commander?"
Elena's expression grew cold and focused. I'm proposing that we hunt them.
Not with weapons designed to destroy them, but with tactics designed to understand and exploit their adaptive limitations. She turned to Admiral Thexnara. Admiral, I need to know everything about their adaptation process. How do they share information between entities? How do they prioritize threats? What triggers their adaptive responses? The Admiral consulted her tactical databases. According to previous encounters, they seem to prioritize immediate survival threats over long-term tactical advantages. Adaptation appears to be triggered by successful weapon impacts, with information sharing occurring through some form of quantum entanglement between entities. Elena nodded. Perfect. Admiral, here's what I need from your fleet. Create multiple simultaneous threats that force the Devourers to choose which adaptations to prioritize. Make them adapt to so many different weapon types that they can't develop effective countermeasures for all of them. She called up a complex tactical diagram. While your fleet keeps them busy with conventional weapons, I'll approach using a completely different methodology. Something they won't recognize as a threat until it's too late. General Korthak's warrior instincts clearly approved of the aggressive approach. How do you propose to approach entities that can detect and adapt to any weapon system? Elena's smile was sharp and predatory. General, the Devourers adapt to weapons, but my rifle isn't just a weapon. It's a hunting tool used by an apex predator that's been refining its killing techniques for millions of years. She gestured to her equipment case.
These entities have adapted to resist energy weapons, molecular disruptors, and quantum technology, but they've never encountered a predator that specializes in stalking adaptive prey through patience, stealth, and the kind of precision that doesn't announce itself until the killing shot is taken. Admiral Fexnar's patterns flickered with uncertainty. Commander, the Devourers are massive entities with energy shields and adaptive armor. How can a single kinetic weapon possibly affect them? Elena's expression grew distant as she considered the tactical challenge. Admiral, every creature has vulnerable points. Systems that can't be armored without losing function. Sensors that must remain exposed to operate effectively, life support mechanisms that can't be adapted without killing the organism. She paused, her mind already calculating distances and angles. The Devourers have survived by adapting to direct threats. But I'm not going to threaten them directly. I'm going to hunt them the way my ancestors hunted creatures that were bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than they were. Elena turned to face the assembled fleet commanders. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various classifications, you're about to witness something that no devourer has ever experienced. Being stalked by a human hunter who understands that the most dangerous prey requires the most careful approach. As the devourer entities continued their approach toward Kepler Prime, Elena began her final preparations. This wouldn't be a battle in any conventional sense. It would be a hunt, conducted according to principles that predated spaceflight, guided by instincts that had been refined through millions of years of evolution. The Devourers had adapted to resist every advanced weapon in the galaxy. But they had never been hunted by a species that had learned to kill adaptive prey long before they had ever seen the stars. Elena checked her rifle one final time and began to plan the stalking approach that would either save Kepler Prime or prove that some prey was too dangerous for even human hunters to take down. Elena's hunter's approach required patience that most military strategists would consider reckless. While the Council fleet engaged the Devourer entities with coordinated weapon strikes designed to force multiple simultaneous adaptations, Elena positioned herself in a stolen Cortex stealth fighter at the edge of the battle zone. She had spent hours studying the Devourers' behavioral patterns, noting how they responded to different threats and identifying the subtle tells that indicated their adaptation processes. These weren't ships or machines. They were living creatures, and like all living creatures, they had instincts and reflexes that could be predicted and exploited. The battle had been raging for 2 hours when Elena began her approach. The Council fleet was performing exactly as planned, forcing the Devourers to adapt to quantum disruptors, molecular weapons, gravity manipulators, and a dozen other advanced technologies. Each successful weapon strike triggered visible biological changes as the creatures modified their structure to resist that specific threat type. But Elena had noticed something the fleet commanders missed. The Devourers' adaptations followed a predictable priority system. They prioritized immediate survival threats over long-term tactical advantages, which meant they were vulnerable during the adaptation process itself. Elena's modified stealth fighter drifted through the debris field from destroyed escort vessels, its systems powered down to minimal levels to avoid detection. She was using the oldest stealth technology in the human arsenal, remaining perfectly still and looking like something harmless. Through her rifle scope, she studied the nearest Devourer entity. It was massive beyond comprehension, a living ship that pulsed with organic rhythms as it fired weapons that seemed to grow and dissolve with each shot. Its surface was constantly shifting, adapting to the various weapons being fired at it by the Council fleet. But Elena's hunter's eye saw what the military analysts missed.
There, near what appeared to be the creature's sensory cluster, was a series of organic structures that maintained consistent configuration despite the constant adaptation happening elsewhere. These had to be critical systems that couldn't be modified without risking the creature's survival.
Elena waited for her moment. The Devourer was currently adapting to a sustained bombardment from Admiral Fexnar's quantum disruptors, its entire forward section reconfiguring to resist energy-based attacks. During this adaptation phase, its attention and biological resources were focused on the immediate threat. Elena powered her fighter's engines just enough to begin a silent drift toward the creature's undefended side. Her approach was slow, patient, using the gravitational pull of nearby debris to mask any energy signature. This wasn't the kind of aggressive attack run that most military pilots would attempt. This was the stalking approach of a predator closing on prey that didn't know it was being hunted. The Devourer's adaptation to quantum weapons was nearly complete when Elena reached optimal range. She positioned her fighter behind a piece of destroyed cruiser hull, using the wreckage as both concealment and a stable firing platform. Through her scope, she could see her target clearly, a cluster of sensory organs that the creature used to coordinate its biological functions. Elena controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow as decades of training took over. This shot had to be perfect. She would get exactly one chance before the creature adapted to kinetic weapons, and missing would alert all three devourers to the threat of precision targeting.
The creature finished its adaptation to quantum weapons and began turning toward a new threat, a wing of Krulon fighters attacking from a different angle. For just a moment, the sensory cluster was perfectly positioned, unshielded by the creature's adaptive armor, aligned with Elena's firing solution.
Elena's finger tightened on the trigger, and the rifle spoke with its familiar sharp crack. The bullet traveled across 3 kilometers of space in under a second, striking the sensory cluster with the precision that had become Elena's trademark. But instead of simply penetrating the target, the specially designed round delivered its real payload, a concentrated burst of electromagnetic interference that overloaded the creature's nervous system. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The devourer's coordinated adaptation processes failed, leaving it partially adapted to several different weapon types, but completely vulnerable to all of them. Its biological systems began fighting each other as conflicting adaptive instructions tried to execute simultaneously.
The Council fleet recognized the opportunity immediately. Admiral Thexnar's flagship fired everything it had at the confused creature, and for the first time in the battle, a devourer entity took critical damage. But instead of destroying it, the Admiral followed Elena's tactical advice, wounded enough to affect its behavior but leave it alive to serve as a distraction for its companions.
The wounded devourer began emitting distress signals that immediately drew the attention of the other 2 entities. They abandoned their coordinated attack on Kepler Prime's defenses and moved to assist their injured companion.
Elena was already repositioning for her second shot, but this one would be different. She had learned from observing the first creature's adaptation process, and she now understood that the devourer's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. The second entity was larger than the first, its adaptive systems more sophisticated. But as it approached its wounded companion, it made the same mistake that had allowed Elena to hunt successfully for her entire career. It focused entirely on the known threat and ignored the possibility of being stalked by a patient predator. Elena's second shot targeted a different vulnerability. Instead of attacking the creature's sensory systems, she aimed for its reproductive organs, the biological structures responsible for converting consumed matter into new devourer entities. The specially designed round delivered a payload of engineered viruses that human biowarfare specialists had developed specifically for this encounter. The effect wasn't immediate, but it was decisive. The virus began systematically attacking the creature's reproductive capabilities, turning its own adaptive systems against it. The more it tried to adapt to the biological threat, the more damage the virus caused to its core functions. Within minutes, the second devourer was experiencing cascading biological failures. Its adaptive systems were so busy fighting the viral infection that they couldn't respond to the Council fleet's renewed attacks. Elena was already moving toward her final target when her communication system activated.
Commander Vasquez, Admiral Fexanara's voice filled her fighter's cockpit. The third entity is adapting to your kinetic weapon approach. Our sensors show significant biological modifications designed to resist projectile attacks. Elena smiled grimly. This was exactly what she had expected. Admiral, the third creature has made a critical error. It's adapted to resist my weapon instead of adapting to avoid being hunted. She powered her fighter's engines to full capacity, abandoning stealth for speed as she raced toward an intercept course with the third devourer. This entity was the largest and most sophisticated of the 3, its adaptive systems having learned from the fate of its companions. But Elena wasn't planning to shoot it. As her fighter closed on the massive creature, Elena activated every weapon system her stolen vessel possessed. Energy cannons, missile launchers, and quantum torpedoes all fired simultaneously, creating a spectacular display of firepower that drew the devourer's complete attention. The creature's adaptive systems responded immediately, reconfiguring its structure to resist the multiple weapon types. But while it focused on adapting to Elena's fighter's weapons, it failed to notice that Elena herself had ejected from the vessel. In a combat suit designed for zero-gravity operations, Elena drifted through space toward the creature's hull, her rifle secured to her suit, and her approach masked by the debris from her fighter's destruction. The devourer had successfully adapted to resist everything she had thrown at it, but it hadn't adapted to resist a predator landing directly on its surface. Elena's magnetic boots clamped onto the creature's hull, and she began moving across its surface toward the structure she had identified as its central coordination system. The creature's sensors couldn't detect her presence against its own hull, and its adaptive systems were still focused on the threat from conventional weapons. Elena reached her target and pressed the barrel of her rifle directly against what appeared to be the creature's primary neural cluster.
At point-blank range, with no shields or armor between her weapon and the target, even an adapted devourer couldn't survive.
But Elena's final shot wasn't designed to kill the creature. It was designed to reprogram it.
The bullet contained a computer virus that human cyber warfare specialist had developed based on Elena's observations of devourer adaptation processes. Instead of trying to destroy the creature's biological systems, the virus convinced them that the nearby human worlds were actually devourer territory that needed to be protected.
The effect was immediate and total. The creature's aggressive instincts reversed themselves, turning its weapons against the damaged companions it had been trying to protect.
Within minutes, all three devourer entities were fighting each other with the same ferocity they had previously directed at the Council fleet. Elena activated her suit's emergency beacon and waited for pickup, watching as the creatures that,